The mafia boss came home earlier than expected, and what he saw between his daughter and the housekeeper made him cry for the first time in 3 years. After 3 years of absolute silence, Enrico Valenti had grown accustomed to the emptiness, but he never accepted it. The Valenti mansion sat on the edge of Lake Michigan, a sprawling estate in Chicago's Gold Coast that would make any billionaire envious. Italian marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers imported from Venice. Priceless paintings lined the walls. A wine cellar held bottles worth more than most people's homes. The garden looked like it belonged in a magazine, perfectly manicured, not a single leaf out of place. And yet, every corner of this palace felt like a tomb. Enrico stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching the gray waters of the lake. At 37, he commanded an empire that stretched across the Midwest. Casinos, real estate, restaurants, all legitimate fronts for the blood-soaked foundation beneath. Men twice his age lowered their eyes when he entered a room. His name alone could end lives or save them. But none of that power could bring back his wife, and none of it could make his daughter speak. 3 years ago, on a night that replayed in his nightmares like a broken film, Elena Valenti had died in his arms. The bullet had been meant for him. She had seen the gunman a split second before Enrico did, and she had done what any mother would do. She had pushed their 2-year-old daughter behind her body and taken the shot meant for her husband. Little Lily had been holding her mother's hand when Elena collapsed. The blood had soaked into Lily's white dress. She had watched her mother's eyes go empty while screaming for her to wake up. After that night, Lily never spoke again. Not a single word, not a cry, not a laugh, nothing. The doctors called it selective mutism, caused by severe psychological trauma. The specialists used terms like dissociative response and acute stress disorder. Enrico had flown in experts from New York, London, Switzerland. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on therapists, treatments, experimental programs. Nothing worked. Lily simply existed now. She would sit by the window in her room for hours, staring at nothing. Her large brown eyes, so much like Elena's, held no light. The nannies came and went, unable to connect with a child who seemed to have left her body behind. Elena's room remained untouched, a shrine frozen in time. Her perfume still sat on the vanity. Her dresses hung in the closet. Enrico could not bear to change a single thing, as if preserving the room might somehow preserve his last connection to her. Every night, he would stand outside Lily's door, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. He wanted to go in, to hold her, to beg her to come back to him. But the guilt always stopped him. Elena had died because of him, because of his world, because of the enemies he had made. How could he face the daughter who had lost everything because of his sins? The mansion had 17 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, and more square footage than most apartment buildings. Staff moved through the halls like ghosts, afraid to make noise. Laughter had been banned the moment Elena's heart stopped beating. What good was an empire when your castle was a graveyard? Enrico Valenti had millions in the bank, an empire built on blood and fear, but his mansion was a mausoleum, and the only voice he longed to hear had been silent for 3 years. 30 miles south of the Valenti mansion, in a world that couldn't be more different, Sienna Monroe was counting coins at 2 a.m. Gary, Indiana had once been a thriving steel city. Now it was a graveyard of abandoned factories and broken dreams. Entire neighborhoods sat empty, houses boarded up, streets cracked and forgotten. The people who remained did so because they had nowhere else to go. Sienna lived in one of those neighborhoods, in a cramped apartment where the heating barely worked and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every cry, every siren that wailed through the night. She sat at the tiny kitchen table, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay. The fluorescent light above her flickered, casting shadows across her exhausted face. 27 years old, and she looked like life had already beaten her down. From the bedroom came the sound of labored breathing. Her mother, Grace, lay paralyzed from the waist down, trapped in a body that had been broken by the man who was supposed to love her. Sienna's father had been a drunk, a monster who used his fists whenever the whiskey ran low. 14 years ago, he had beaten Grace so severely that her spine had shattered. Sienna had watched it happen. She had been 13, hiding behind the couch, too terrified to scream. By the time the ambulance arrived, her mother would never walk again. Her father had disappeared that same night, only to be found dead in a ditch 2 years later, drowned in his own vomit. No one mourned him. Sienna certainly didn't. Since that day, she had become the provider. She dropped out of school at 14 to work, cleaning houses, waitressing, washing dishes, whatever it took to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Now she worked 3 jobs, And it still wasn't enough. A small cough came from the couch, where her 12-year-old brother Tommy slept. He had been born with a defective heart, a cruel twist of fate that required surgery costing $150,000. Surgery they could never afford. The doctors had given him maybe 2 years without it. 2 years. 730 days to watch her baby brother slowly die. Sienna wiped her eyes and looked at the stack of medical bills. $80,000 in debt already. The collectors called daily. Sometimes they threatened. Sometimes they just laughed. Her gaze drifted to the old guitar leaning against the wall. It was the only thing of value she owned, not because it was expensive, but because it had belonged to her mother. Grace had once sung in the church choir, before the beating stole her joy. She had taught Sienna every song she knew. Now singing was the only thing that kept Sienna from falling apart. She hummed softly as she flipped through a newspaper someone had left at the diner. Most of the job listings were useless, minimum wage positions that wouldn't make a dent in their mountain of debt. Then she saw it. Housekeeper needed. Chicago. Private residence. Salary 5 times what she made now. Room and board included. Sienna read it again. And again. It seemed too good to be true. But what choice did she have? She looked at Tommy's sleeping form, listened to his shallow breaths, and made her decision. She would take this job. She would save her brother. She would do whatever it took. Sienna didn't know that this job would lead her into the den of Chicago's most dangerous predator. She certainly didn't know she would be the only one capable of taming him. The iron gates of the Valenti estate rose before Sienna like the entrance to another world. She stood on the sidewalk, clutching her small suitcase in one hand and her mother's guitar in the other. The bus ride from Gary had taken 2 hours, but the distance between her old life and this place felt like 1,000 miles. The mansion loomed ahead, a magnificent structure of stone and glass that seemed to swallow the sky. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined the driveway. Marble fountains sparkled in the afternoon sun. Even the air smelled different here, clean and expensive. Sienna had cleaned wealthy homes before, but nothing like this. She walked up the long driveway, her worn shoes silent against the polished stone. Every step reminded her how much she didn't belong. Her second-hand dress suddenly felt shabby. Her suitcase looked pathetic next to the luxury surrounding her. But she thought of Tommy's weak heartbeat, of the bills piling up, of her mother's hollow eyes. She kept walking. The front door opened before she could knock. A tall man in a crisp black suit stood in the doorway, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture rigid but not unkind. He looked to be in his late 50s, with the weathered face of someone who had seen too much. "Miss Monroe?" His voice was formal but not cold. "Yes, sir. I am Marcus Webb, head of the household staff. Please, come in." Sienna stepped inside and nearly forgot to breathe. The entrance hall alone was larger than her entire apartment. A grand staircase swept upward like something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with angels and clouds. Every surface gleamed with wealth that Sienna couldn't comprehend. Marcus noticed her reaction but said nothing. Instead, he gestured for her to follow. As they walked, he spoke in a low, measured tone. "There are 3 rules you must understand before you begin. First, never ask about the former lady of the house. Her name is not to be mentioned. Second, never enter the child's room unless specifically summoned. Third, never look directly into the master's eyes when he addresses you." Sienna nodded, though the rules felt strange, suffocating. Marcus paused, his gaze falling on the guitar case in her hand. Something flickered across his face, almost like pain. "There is no music in this house," he said quietly. "There hasn't been for 3 years." Before Sienna could ask why, Marcus continued walking. She hurried to keep up, her eyes wandering despite herself. That was when she saw it. A photograph hung in the hallway, partially hidden in shadow. A family portrait, a man with dark eyes and a rare smile. A beautiful woman with chestnut hair, laughing. And between them, a little girl with bright eyes and rosy cheeks, grinning at the camera. They looked happy, whole, alive. Sienna stared at the picture, and a chill ran down her spine. The contrast between that frozen moment of joy and the silence pressing against her now was almost unbearable. This house was beautiful, but it felt like a grave. Something terrible had happened here. She could feel it in the walls, in the air, in the way Marcus walked like he was carrying invisible weight. Sienna had survived hell. She thought she was used to darkness, but this house held something colder than any winter night in Gary. Sienna saw him for the first time on her second day. She was polishing the banister of the grand staircase when the front door opened. The sound echoed through the silent mansion like a warning. Every staff member seemed to freeze, their movements becoming smaller, quieter. invisible. Sienna looked up and understood why. Enrico Valenti walked through the entrance hall like a king returning to his throne. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair combed back from a face that could have been carved from stone. His jaw was sharp. His suit was immaculate. But it was his eyes that made Sienna's breath catch. They were black, not brown, not dark gray. Black, like the bottom of a well where no light could reach. Those eyes swept across the room without seeing anyone. The maids lowered their heads. The butler stepped aside. Even the air seemed to part for him. This was not a man. This was a force of nature. Sienna pressed herself against the banister, remembering Marcus's warning. Never look directly into his eyes. Now she understood. Looking into those eyes felt like staring into the barrel of a gun. Enrico climbed the stairs without glancing at her. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate, the sound of someone carrying weight that no one else could see. He disappeared down the second-floor hallway, and the house slowly exhaled. But Sienna's curiosity had been awakened. That evening, she found herself cleaning the corridor near the east wing. This was where the child's room was located, the room she had been warned never to enter. She worked slowly, carefully, her eyes drifting toward the closed door. Then she saw him again. Enrico stood outside his daughter's room, his hand raised as if to knock. But he didn't knock. He just stood there, frozen, staring at the door like it was a wall he couldn't climb. Minutes passed. His hand trembled slightly. Then, without a sound, he lowered it and walked away. Sienna watched him disappear around the corner, her heart aching with a confusion she didn't expect. The most powerful man in Chicago, afraid to enter his own daughter's room. The next morning, Sienna finally saw Lily. The door was open just a crack, and through it, she glimpsed a small figure sitting by the window. The girl was 5 years old, with dark curls and her father's sharp features. She wore a white dress and held a stuffed rabbit against her chest. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared out the window at nothing. Sienna had seen that emptiness before. In her mother's eyes after the beatings, in her own reflection during the darkest years. This child wasn't living. She was simply existing. Without thinking, Sienna began to hum as she dusted the hallway. It was a habit, something she did to keep the silence from swallowing her whole. A soft melody, barely louder than a whisper. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Lily turned her head. It was just a second, a flicker of movement. Her hollow eyes shifted toward the sound, and something, not quite recognition, not quite interest, but something, passed across her face. Sienna didn't notice. She had already moved on to the next room. But at the end of the corridor, hidden in the shadows, Marcus Webb stood watching. His old eyes widened slightly, his breath caught in his throat. In 3 years, Lily had never reacted to anything, not to toys, not to doctors, not to her own father. But she had turned toward the music. No one knew that from that moment, the wheels of fate had begun to turn. The black Mercedes pulled up to the mansion on Saturday afternoon, and the entire household shifted into high alert. Sienna watched from the second-floor window as a woman emerged from the car. She moved like a runway model, each step calculated for maximum elegance. Her designer dress hugged her slender frame. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders. Even from a distance, she radiated the kind of beauty that made other women feel invisible. Victoria Castellano had arrived. Sienna had heard the other servants whispering about her all week. The fiancée, daughter of the Castellano family, one of the most powerful mafia dynasties in New York. The engagement had been arranged to unite 2 empires, a marriage built on strategy rather than love. Victoria entered the mansion like she already owned it. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with sharp authority. She smiled at the staff, but the warmth never reached her eyes. Sienna continued her work, dusting the shelves in the sitting room adjacent to the main hall. She kept her head down, invisible, just another piece of furniture, but she watched. She always watched. Enrico descended the staircase to greet his fiancée. Victoria reached up to kiss his cheek, her manicured hand resting on his chest. He accepted the gesture without returning it. His face remained stone. "I've missed you, darling," Victoria said. Her voice like honey poured over broken glass. "You saw me last week." "A week is too long." She smiled, but something flickered behind her eyes. Impatience, perhaps. Or calculation. Then Victoria turned her attention to the real target. "Where is Lily?" "I brought her a gift." Enrico's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's in her room." "Well, let's go see her. I want to spend time with my future stepdaughter." They climbed the stairs together. Victoria's arm linked through Enrico's. Sienna moved quietly into the hallway. pretending to polish a vase near Lily's door. Through the gap, she saw everything. Victoria knelt beside Lily, holding out an expensive porcelain doll. Her smile was perfect, rehearsed, designed to charm. "Hello, sweetheart. Look what I brought you. Isn't she beautiful?" Lily didn't move. She didn't look at the doll or at Victoria. She simply sat by the window, clutching her old stuffed rabbit, staring at nothing. Victoria tried again, her voice growing sweeter, more insistent. "Don't you want to play? I thought we could be friends." For a moment, Lily seemed to register the presence beside her. She turned her head slowly, and her empty eyes met Victoria's face. Then she flinched, her small body curled inward, away from Victoria, pressing against the window as if trying to disappear through the glass. Victoria's smile froze. For just a second, her mask slipped, and Sienna saw the truth beneath. Irritation, cold, sharp irritation. But the mask returned instantly. "She's just tired," Victoria said lightly, standing up. "We'll try again another time." Enrico said nothing. He was watching his daughter, his dark eyes filled with something Sienna couldn't quite name. Longing, perhaps, or guilt. He didn't look at Victoria once. As the couple left the room, Sienna caught Victoria's expression. The smile was gone now, replaced by something harder, colder. Victoria glanced back at Lily's door, and in that moment, Sienna understood. Victoria saw Lily not as a child to love, but as an obstacle to overcome. A broken little girl standing between her and the empire she craved. Victoria didn't love Enrico. She loved power. And anyone standing in her way would be eliminated. A week had passed since Victoria's visit, and the mansion had returned to its suffocating silence. Sienna had learned the rhythm of this house. Mornings were for the main floors, afternoons for the upper rooms, evenings for staying invisible. She worked quietly, efficiently, never speaking unless spoken to, never drawing attention to herself, but the silence was eating her alive. Back in Gary, no matter how terrible things got, there had always been music. Her mother humming through the pain, Tommy singing off-key to make them laugh, Sienna's own voice filling the empty spaces when the darkness threatened to swallow her whole. Here, there was nothing. Just the echo of footsteps and the weight of grief pressing down on every surface. On this particular afternoon, the house was emptier than usual. Enrico had left for business. Most of the staff had been dismissed early. Even Marcus was occupied somewhere in the East Wing. Sienna found herself alone in the second-floor sitting room, dustcloth in hand, staring at the old guitar case she had hidden behind the curtains. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her fingers ached for the strings. Her throat burned with unsung melodies. The silence was becoming unbearable. Just one song, she told herself. One quiet song. No one would hear. She retrieved the guitar, sat on the floor by the window, and began to play. The melody was soft, tentative at first. A song her mother had taught her years ago, before the beating stole Grace's voice forever. It told the story of a lost child wandering through a dark forest, searching for a light that seemed impossible to find. But in the final verse, the child discovered that the light had been inside her all along. Sienna closed her eyes and let the music carry her away. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't notice the small figure slip into the room. When she finally opened her eyes, Lily was standing 3 feet away. Sienna's hands froze on the strings. Her heart stopped. Every rule Marcus had given her flashed through her mind. Never enter the child's room, never disturb her. Never, never, never. But Lily had come to her. The little girl stood motionless, clutching her stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her dark eyes, usually so empty, held something different now. Not quite emotion, not quite recognition, but something. Sienna waited for her to run, to flinch, to turn away like she had with Victoria. Lily didn't move. Slowly, carefully, Sienna began to play again. The melody was softer now, barely louder than a whisper. She didn't want to frighten this fragile creature away. Lily watched her for a long moment. Then, without a sound, she sat down on the floor. Sienna kept singing, her voice gentle, non-threatening. The song about the lost child finding her light, the song about hope surviving in the darkest places. Minutes passed. The afternoon sun shifted through the windows, casting golden patterns on the hardwood floor. When the song finally ended, Sienna held her breath. Lily's fingers moved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. Just a small tap against her stuffed rabbit, following the rhythm that still echoed in the air. Tap, tap, tap. Sienna's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. This broken child, this ghost who hadn't responded to anything in 3 years, had just moved to the music. It was Lily's first response in 3 years. No one witnessed it. No one knew. But the first crack had appeared in the wall of ice. The grandfather clock in the main hall struck 2 in the morning when Sienna heard the front door open. She had been cleaning the downstairs library, unable to sleep. The encounter with Lily that afternoon kept replaying in her mind. Those small fingers tapping to the rhythm, those empty eyes showing the faintest flicker of life. Hope was a dangerous thing. Sienna knew that better than anyone, but she couldn't stop herself from feeling it. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts, heavy, uneven. Something was wrong. She stepped into the hallway and froze. Enrico Valenti stood in the entrance hall, his silhouette framed by moonlight streaming through the windows. His usually immaculate suit was disheveled, his tie hung loose around his neck, and his white shirt was soaked in blood. Sienna's breath caught in her throat. The crimson stains spread across his chest, his sleeves, his hands. In the pale light, he looked like a demon risen from hell. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Enrico's eyes found her. They were black pits of cold fury, the eyes of a man who had just done terrible things and felt no remorse. His jaw was clenched. His posture radiated danger. Any sane person would have screamed. Any normal woman would have run. Sienna did neither. She stood her ground, her hand still holding the cleaning cloth, her expression calm. Not defiant, not challenging, just steady. Enrico took a step toward her, and his voice came out like gravel scraping against stone. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning, sir." His eyes narrowed. Most of his staff couldn't even meet his gaze. This woman was looking at him like he was just another obstacle in her path. "You saw nothing," he said, the threat implicit in every syllable. "I saw a man come home late from work." Silence stretched between them. Enrico studied her face, searching for the fear that should have been there, the trembling, the panic. He found nothing. "You're not afraid." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, tinged with something almost like confusion. Sienna met his eyes, remembering Marcus's warning but unable to look away. "No, sir." "Why not?" The question seemed to surprise even him. Enrico Valenti did not ask questions. He gave orders. He made demands. He ended conversations with bullets, not words. But something about this woman made him curious. Sienna considered her answer carefully. She thought of her father's fists, her mother's screams, the years of violence that had shaped her into whatever she was now. "I've been afraid my whole life, Mr. Valenti," she said quietly. "There's no room left for new fears." The words hung in the air like smoke. Enrico stared at her for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind those black eyes. A crack in the armor, perhaps, or maybe just a flicker of recognition. He had seen darkness. So had she. Without another word, he walked past her toward the staircase. His shoulder nearly brushed hers, close enough that she could smell the copper tang of blood mixed with expensive cologne. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, his back to her. "What's your name?" Sienna Monroe." He didn't respond. He simply climbed the stairs and disappeared into the shadows above. Sienna released a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Her hands were shaking now, the delayed reaction finally hitting her. But she hadn't run. She hadn't cowered. And somewhere in the darkness above, Enrico Valenti was thinking the same thing. This woman was different. She didn't tremble before him like everyone else. And that unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. 2 weeks had passed since that first afternoon with the guitar, and something miraculous was happening. Sienna had turned their musical moments into a secret ritual. Every day, when the house grew quiet and Enrico was away on business, she would find a secluded corner and play, softly, carefully, always listening for footsteps. And every day, Lily would appear. The little girl had developed an uncanny sense for when the music would begin. She would slip out of her room like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors, and follow the melody until she found Sienna. At first, she just watched from a distance. Then she began sitting closer. By the end of the first week, she was sitting right beside Sienna, her small body almost touching. Progress came in fragments, tiny miracles that no one else witnessed. Lily started following Sienna around the house, not speaking, not interacting, just trailing behind her like a shadow. When Sienna dusted the shelves, Lily watched. When Sienna mopped the floors, Lily sat nearby. When Sienna took a break to eat in the kitchen, Lily would hover in the doorway. The other staff noticed but said nothing. They had learned long ago not to question anything in this house. Marcus noticed too. Sienna caught him watching them one afternoon, his old eyes glistening with something that looked like hope. He said nothing, just gave her a small nod and walked away. Their secret was safe. One afternoon, Sienna taught Lily to clap along with the music. She demonstrated slowly, her hands coming together in a simple rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Lily watched with those large, hollow eyes. Then, hesitantly, her small hands began to move. Clap, clap, clap. The sound was soft, uncertain, but it was there. Lily was participating. Lily was responding. Sienna wanted to cry, but she held it together. She couldn't afford to startle this fragile connection. Then came the moment that shattered her completely. They were sitting in the second-floor sitting room, the afternoon sun warming the space around them. Sienna was playing a gentle lullaby, one her mother used to sing during the worst nights, when the screaming and the breaking glass made sleep impossible. Lily sat beside her, closer than ever before, and then, without warning, Lily reached out and took Sienna's hand. Her tiny fingers wrapped around Sienna's palm, holding on like she was afraid to let go. It was the first time in 3 years that Lily had voluntarily touched another human being. Sienna stopped playing, her vision blurred with tears she couldn't control. She remembered being 13, hiding in her closet after watching her father beat her mother unconscious. She remembered the silence that had followed, the weeks when she couldn't speak, couldn't cry, couldn't feel anything at all. She had built a wall around herself, just like Lily, a fortress of silence to keep the pain out. But the pain had gotten in anyway. It always did. Lily wasn't broken. She wasn't damaged beyond repair. She was protecting herself the only way she knew how, and Sienna understood that better than anyone. She gently squeezed Lily's hand, letting her tears fall freely now. The little girl looked up at her, and for the first time, something flickered in those empty eyes. Not recognition, not quite emotion, but connection, a bridge between two wounded souls. Sienna understood, because she had built the same wall once, and she knew exactly how to bring it down. The scream tore through the mansion at 3 a.m. It was a sound of pure terror, high-pitched and raw, echoing off the marble walls like a wounded animal's cry, the kind of sound that reached into your chest and squeezed your heart until you couldn't breathe. Sienna bolted upright in her small bed, disoriented. For a moment, she thought she was back in Gary, back in that apartment where screams were as common as silence. Then she remembered where she was. Lily. She threw off her covers and ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor. The screaming continued, wave after wave of wordless anguish that made Sienna's blood run cold. When she reached the second floor, she saw him. Enrico stood outside Lily's door, his hand pressed against the wood, his entire body rigid with desperation. He was wearing only a white undershirt and dark pants, clearly roused from sleep. His usually controlled face was twisted with a pain Sienna had never seen before. "Lily," he called through the door, his voice cracking. "Lily, it's Papa. Please, let me in." The screaming didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. Enrico pushed the door open, but the moment he stepped inside, Lily's cries became hysterical. Through the gap, Sienna could see the little girl pressed against the headboard of her bed, her eyes wild with terror, her small body shaking violently. She was looking at her father like he was a monster. Enrico froze. The devastation on his face was absolute. "Please," he whispered. "Please, baby. It's me. It's Papa." Lily screamed louder, tears streaming down her face, her hands clawing at the wall behind her as if trying to escape through it. Enrico stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't help her. His presence only made it worse. He retreated into the hallway, his back hitting the wall, his eyes hollow with defeat. Sienna made her decision. She moved past him without a word, slipping into Lily's room and closing the door softly behind her. She could feel Enrico's gaze on her back, but she didn't turn around. Lily was still screaming, still pressed against the headboard, lost in whatever nightmare had consumed her. Sienna didn't speak. She didn't try to touch the child or reason with her. She simply sat down on the edge of the bed, folded her hands in her lap, and began to sing. It was the lullaby her mother used to sing, the one about angels watching over sleeping children. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, a gentle current cutting through the storm of Lily's terror. At first, nothing changed. The screaming continued, raw and desperate, but Sienna kept singing. Slowly, gradually, the cries began to fade. Lily's wild eyes found Sienna's face. Her breathing started to slow. The tension in her small body began to release. Sienna extended her hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Lily stared at it for a long moment. Then, like a wounded bird seeking shelter, she crawled across the bed and climbed into Sienna's lap. Her small arms wrapped around Sienna's waist, Her tear-streaked face pressed against Sienna's chest. Her tiny body trembled with the aftershocks of her nightmare. And Sienna held her, rocking gently, singing softly, being the anchor this child desperately needed. Outside the door, Enrico watched through the narrow gap. He saw his daughter, the child who flinched at his touch, curled peacefully in the arms of a stranger. He saw the tears drying on her cheeks. He heard the soft melody that had accomplished what years of therapy and millions of dollars could not. Something broke inside him. He was her father. He loved her more than his own life. But he wasn't the one she needed. And that truth was killing him slowly. 1 week later, the impossible happened. The meeting had been canceled at the last minute. A scheduling conflict with the Castellano representatives. Something about flights being delayed from New York. Enrico didn't care about the details. He was exhausted, his mind heavy with thoughts he couldn't escape. Since that night outside Lily's door, he hadn't been able to sleep properly. The image haunted him. His daughter, the child he would die for, finding comfort in the arms of a housekeeper while recoiling from his touch. He had hired the best doctors, paid for the most expensive treatments, built a fortress to protect her from the world, and none of it mattered. The drive home took 40 minutes. Enrico spent every second replaying his failures. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching his little girl disappear further into herself. 3 years of standing helplessly outside her door, unable to reach her. When he pulled into the driveway, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the estate. He entered through the side door, avoiding the main entrance where the staff would see him. He wanted solitude. He wanted silence. What he got was music. Enrico froze in the hallway, his briefcase hanging from his fingers. The sound was faint, drifting down from the second floor. A guitar, a woman's voice singing softly. That was impossible. There was no music in this house. There hadn't been since Elena died. He moved toward the staircase, his footsteps silent from years of habit. The melody grew clearer as he climbed. A gentle song, something about lost children finding their way home. The door to the second-floor sitting room was open. Enrico approached slowly, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't since the night Elena was shot. He pressed himself against the wall, peering through the doorway, and his world stopped. Sienna sat on the floor in a patch of sunlight, her old guitar cradled in her arms. Her eyes were closed, her voice soft and sweet, completely absorbed in the song. But that wasn't what made Enrico's blood turn to ice. Lily sat across from her. His daughter, who hadn't spoken in 3 years, was moving her lips. Sounds were coming out, small, uncertain sounds that didn't quite form words, but sounds nonetheless. She was singing. Lily was singing along. The briefcase slipped from Enrico's fingers and hit the marble floor with a crash. Both heads turned toward the doorway. Sienna's eyes went wide with alarm, but Lily looked at her father without fear. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't flinch. She didn't cower. She didn't try to disappear. She looked at him, and her cracked, unused voice pushed out a sound that shattered everything Enrico thought he knew. Pa, pa, 2 syllables, barely audible, rough as sandpaper from years of silence. But it was her voice, his daughter's voice. Enrico's knees buckled. He didn't feel himself fall. He didn't feel the hard floor beneath him. All he could see was Lily's face. All he could hear was that word echoing in his skull. Papa. Tears streamed down his face. He couldn't stop them. Didn't try to. The most feared man in Chicago was kneeling on the ground, weeping like a child, because his daughter had spoken his name. Sienna watched in stunned silence, her guitar still in her hands. She had never seen a man break apart so completely. She had never seen such raw, desperate love. Lily stood up slowly. She walked toward her father on unsteady legs, her small hand reaching out. When her fingers touched his face, Enrico let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might vanish if he let go. And for the first time in 3 years, Lily let him. The mafia boss who made all of Chicago tremble was kneeling on the floor, crying, because of 2 syllables from the daughter he thought he had lost. Victoria arrived at the mansion without warning the very next day. Her driver pulled up to the entrance just as the afternoon sun reached its peak. She had heard rumors from one of the household staff she kept on her private payroll. Something about the child. Something about a miracle. She needed to see for herself. The front door opened before she could knock. Marcus stood there, his expression carefully neutral. But Victoria caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or warning. Miss Castellano, we weren't expecting you. I wanted to surprise my fiancé. She smiled, All teeth and no warmth. Where is he? In the garden, miss. With Miss Lily. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Enrico never spent time in the garden. He barely spent time anywhere that reminded him of his dead wife. She walked through the mansion, her heels clicking against the marble. When she reached the French doors leading to the back garden, she stopped. The scene before her was impossible. Enrico sat on the grass, something he would never do in his expensive suits. Lily was in his lap, her small hands playing with his tie, and she was laughing. The sound was rusty, uncertain, like a music box that hadn't been wound in years. But it was laughter. Standing a few feet away, watching with a gentle smile, was Sienna Monroe. Victoria's blood turned cold. She pushed through the doors, her face arranged into an expression of delighted surprise. "Enrico, what's happening here?" Enrico looked up, and Victoria noticed immediately that something had changed. The permanent darkness behind his eyes had lifted, just slightly. He looked almost hopeful. "Victoria." He rose to his feet, lifting Lily with him. "Lily spoke yesterday. She said my name." "Oh my God." Victoria pressed a hand to her chest, the picture of emotional support. "That's wonderful. How did this happen?" Enrico's gaze drifted to Sienna, who had stepped back, trying to make herself invisible. Sienna. She reached her when no one else could. The name cut through Victoria like a blade. She looked at the housekeeper properly for the first time. Plain clothes, worn shoes, no makeup, nothing special about her at all. And yet, how marvelous, Victoria said, her smile never wavering. "You must be so talented with children." Sienna lowered her eyes. "I just sang to her, miss. That's all." But it wasn't all. Victoria could see that clearly. She watched Enrico for the rest of the afternoon, cataloging every glance, every gesture. He looked at Sienna differently than he looked at the other staff. There was respect there, curiosity, something that looked dangerously close to tenderness. And Lily, the child who had recoiled from Victoria's touch, now clung to Sienna like a lifeline. When the housekeeper moved, Lily followed. When Sienna spoke, Lily listened. That evening, Victoria overheard one of the maids gossiping in the hallway. "Every morning, the little one wakes up calling for Miss Sienna. Won't eat breakfast until she comes." The words burned in Victoria's chest. She had spent months trying to connect with Lily. She had brought expensive gifts. She had worn soft colors and gentle perfumes. She had done everything right. And this nobody, this servant with her cheap guitar and her sad eyes, had accomplished in weeks what Victoria couldn't do in a year. Worse, she was accomplishing something else. She was making Enrico feel again. Victoria recognized the signs, the way his walls were coming down, the way his voice softened when Sienna was near, the way he actually smiled now, something he hadn't done since Elena's death. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. Victoria returned to her guest room and locked the door. She stood before the mirror, studying her perfect reflection. She had clawed her way through the brutal politics of the Castellano family. She had survived rivals who wanted her dead. She had positioned herself to become the queen of 2 criminal empires. She would not lose everything to a housekeeper. Victoria didn't fear enemies with guns. She feared the woman who could touch the heart she could never reach. The weeks that followed were nothing short of miraculous. Lily bloomed like a flower finally finding sunlight. Each day brought new words, new sounds, new expressions that had been locked away for 3 years. She said hungry when she wanted food. She said pretty when Sienna wore a blue dress. She said papa every time Enrico walked through the door. That word never lost its power. Every single time, it hit Enrico like a wave. The little girl who had been a ghost was becoming a child again. She laughed at silly faces. She ran through the hallways instead of drifting through them. She even started playing with the dolls that had sat untouched in her room since Elena's death. And through it all, Sienna was there. Patient, gentle, constant. Enrico found himself seeking her out. At first, it was about Lily. He would ask Sienna questions about his daughter's progress, about what songs she liked, about what made her smile. Professional conversations, appropriate distances. But the conversations grew longer. The distances grew shorter. He started appearing in doorways where Sienna was working. He began taking his evening coffee in the kitchen instead of his study. He found reasons to be wherever she happened to be. One evening, he found her alone on the back terrace, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, but Enrico barely noticed. He was too busy watching the way the fading light caught in her hair. "May I join you?" he asked. Sienna startled slightly. Of course, sir. He sat down on the stone bench beside her, closer than he should have. You never talk about yourself. I realized I know nothing about you. She kept her eyes on the horizon. There's not much to tell. I doubt that. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was expectant, waiting. Finally, Sienna spoke. She told him about Gary, about the apartment with broken heating, about her mother, Grace, paralyzed and bedridden, beaten by a man who was supposed to protect her, about Tommy, her 12-year-old brother, whose heart was failing and who needed surgery that cost more than Sienna could earn in 10 lifetimes. She told him about the bills, $80,000 in debt, collectors calling at all hours, the constant, crushing weight of knowing that no matter how hard she worked, it would never be enough. She told him everything, her voice steady even as her hands trembled in her lap. When she finished, Enrico was quiet for a long moment. Let me help, he said finally. The surgery, the debts, all of it. I can make one phone call and it's done. Sienna shook her head. No, why not? She turned to face him, and her eyes held a fire he hadn't seen before. Because I don't sell my dignity for money, Mr. Valenti. Not to anyone. Enrico stared at her. In his entire life, no one had ever refused his help. No one had ever looked at his wealth and said no. People begged him for scraps. They betrayed each other for a fraction of what he was offering. And this woman, with her sick mother and dying brother and mountain of debt, had just turned him down flat. You're different, he said softly. I'm just poor, sir. We have our own kind of pride. She stood and walked back into the house, leaving Enrico alone with the dying light. He sat there for a long time, thinking about Elena, about the way she used to look at him before the world turned dark, about the emptiness that had consumed him since her death. Sienna didn't want his money. She didn't want his power. She didn't want anything from him at all. And that made her the most dangerous woman he had ever met. Enrico was falling. He knew it. But he also knew that love in his world always ended in blood. Victoria made her move 3 days later. She sat in her New York penthouse, flipping through the file that Frank Russo had delivered that morning. Frank was a useful man, a private investigator with connections on both sides of the law. He had a talent for digging up dirt that people wanted to stay buried, and Sienna Monroe had plenty of dirt. Victoria studied each page with growing satisfaction. Medical debts totaling $80,000, a mother paralyzed by domestic violence, a brother with a failing heart, an abusive father who drank himself to death, a childhood spent in poverty and fear. It was perfect, absolutely perfect. The girl is desperate, Frank said, lighting a cigarette. Probably saw Valenti as her meal ticket. Classic gold digger situation. Victoria smiled. I want you to send someone to the mansion, a debt collector. Make sure it happens when the staff is around. Frank raised an eyebrow. You want to humiliate her publicly? I want to remind everyone exactly what she is. A charity case who doesn't belong. The collector arrived at the Valenti estate 2 days later. He was a large man with a cheap suit and a loud voice, the kind of person designed to intimidate and embarrass. He pushed past Marcus at the front door and marched into the main hall, where several maids were polishing the furniture. I'm looking for Sienna Monroe, he announced, his voice echoing off the marble walls. She owes my client a significant amount of money. Sienna was coming down the staircase when she heard her name. She froze, her blood turning to ice. The collector spotted her immediately. There she is. Miss Monroe, you're 3 months behind on your payments. My client is losing patience. The maids stopped working. All eyes turned to Sienna. She descended the remaining stairs slowly, her legs feeling like lead. I've been making payments. Every month. Not enough. The man pulled out a stack of papers. $80,000, plus interest, plus penalties. You're drowning, sweetheart. One of the maids whispered something to another. Sienna caught the words gold digger and felt her face burn. The collector smiled cruelly. Let me guess. You came here thinking you'd find a rich man to solve your problems? That's what girls like you do, isn't it? Find a wealthy mark and spread your legs until the debts disappear? Sienna's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to run away and never come back. But she had learned long ago that tears only made predators hungrier. I will pay every dollar I owe, she said, her voice steady despite the shame burning through her. With my own labor, my own hands. I don't need anyone's charity. The collector laughed. With what? Your maid's salary? You'll be paying this off until you're dead. Then I'll die paying it. The room went silent. No one noticed Enrico standing in the doorway of his study. No one saw the rage building behind his black eyes as he took in the scene. He stepped forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Get out." 2 words, spoken quietly, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. The collector turned, his smirk fading as he recognized who was speaking. The color drained from his face. "Mr. Valenti, I was just, get out of my house. Now, before I have you removed in pieces." The man didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled for the door, papers scattering in his wake. The maid scattered too. Suddenly finding urgent work elsewhere, Sienna stood alone in the middle of the hall, waiting for Enrico to say something, to offer comfort, to show some sign that he didn't see her the way everyone else did. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Then he turned and walked back into his study, closing the door behind him. Sienna felt something crack inside her chest. She was used to humiliation, but being humiliated in front of the man she was starting to have feelings for, that was a different kind of pain. The knock came at 9 o'clock that evening. Sienna had been packing her suitcase, her hands moving mechanically through the motions. She had already said goodbye to Lily, kissing the sleeping child's forehead and whispering promises she knew she couldn't keep. It was over. She had seen the look on Enrico's face, the silence that spoke louder than words. He knew now what everyone else would soon know, that she was nothing but a desperate woman drowning in debt. Marcus appeared at her door. "Mr. Valenti wants to see you in his study." Sienna's stomach dropped. So this was how it would end. Not with a whimper, but with a formal dismissal in his office. She followed Marcus through the silent hallways, her footsteps echoing like a funeral march. When she reached the study door, she paused to straighten her uniform. If she was going to be fired, she would face it with dignity. She knocked. "Come in." Enrico sat behind his massive desk, surrounded by shadows. A single lamp cast golden light across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the darkness of his eyes. He looked tired, human, almost vulnerable. "Sit down," he said. Sienna took the chair across from him, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She waited for the axe to fall. But Enrico didn't talk about termination. Instead, he asked a question she didn't expect. "Tell me everything." Sienna blinked. "Sir? About your life, your family, everything that man said today. I want to hear it from you." She stared at him, searching for the trap. Rich men didn't ask poor women to share their stories. They didn't care about the details of suffering they would never understand. But Enrico's eyes held no judgment, only patience. So Sienna talked. She told him about the beatings, about hiding under her bed while her father's fists connected with her mother's body, about the night Grace's spine shattered and the world as Sienna knew it ended. She told him about dropping out of school at 14, about the music scholarship to Juilliard that she had to refuse because someone needed to work, about watching her dreams die so her family could survive. She told him about Tommy, her baby brother with the broken heart, the surgery that cost $150,000, the doctors who gave him 2 years without it. She told him about the fear that lived in her chest every single day, the terror of losing everyone she loved because she couldn't earn money fast enough. When she finished, her throat was raw and her eyes were burning, but she hadn't cried. She refused to cry. Enrico was silent for a long moment. "Why don't you hate the world?" he asked finally. "After everything it's done to you?" Sienna considered the question. "Because there are people who need me to keep going. My mother, my brother. Hating the world is a luxury for people who don't have responsibilities." The words hung in the air between them. Enrico leaned forward. "I want to pay for Tommy's surgery and clear your debts, all of them." Sienna's breath caught. "This isn't charity," he continued. "You saved my daughter. You gave me back her voice. Consider it payment for services rendered." For a moment, Sienna let herself imagine it. The weight lifted from her shoulders. Tommy healthy and whole, her mother cared for properly. The collectors silenced forever. Then she shook her head. "No." Enrico's eyes widened slightly. "No? I can't accept it, Mr. Valenti. I won't be indebted to anyone, not even you. It's not a debt. It's a gift. There's no such thing." Sienna stood, her legs trembling but her voice firm. "Every gift comes with strings. Every favor requires repayment. I've learned that the hard way." She walked to the door, then paused. "Thank you for the offer, truly, but I need to save my family on my own terms, even if it takes the rest of my life." She left without looking back. Enrico sat alone in his study, staring at the closed door. She had just refused $150,000 from a mafia boss. Either she was insane, or she was the only person in the world who couldn't be bought. Victoria struck again 2 days later. This time, she had learned from her mistakes. Public humiliation hadn't broken Sienna. The woman had stood her ground with a spine of steel that Victoria hadn't anticipated. But theft. Theft was different. Theft was unforgivable. Victoria arrived at the mansion early that morning, her plan already in motion. While Enrico was in a meeting and Sienna was tending to Lily, she slipped into the master bedroom. The Rolex sat on Enrico's nightstand. A gift from his father, worth over $50,000. More importantly, it held sentimental value that money couldn't measure. Victoria tucked it into her purse and made her way to the servants' quarters. Sienna's room was small and sparse, a narrow bed, a simple dresser, the old guitar leaning against the wall, nothing of value except the bare necessities. Victoria placed the watch inside Sienna's worn handbag and left as quietly as she had come. That evening, she approached Enrico in his study with a carefully crafted expression of concern. "Darling, I don't want to alarm you, but I noticed your father's watch isn't in its usual place. I hope nothing has happened to it." Enrico frowned. He walked to his bedroom, Victoria following close behind. The nightstand was empty. His jaw tightened. Within the hour, the household staff was assembled in the main hall. Marcus stood to the side, his face troubled. The maids whispered among themselves. Sienna stood apart from the others, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. "A valuable item has gone missing," Enrico announced, his voice cold. "A watch that belonged to my father. I want every room searched." The search began methodically. One by one, the staff quarters were examined. When they reached Sienna's room, Victoria insisted on being present. The security guard opened Sienna's handbag, and there it was, the Rolex, gleaming under the harsh light like a guilty verdict. Gasps rippled through the assembled staff. Victoria shook her head sadly. "I didn't want to believe it. But the evidence is right there. The girl with all those debts, stealing from the man who employed her." Sienna stared at the watch in disbelief. Her mind raced, trying to understand how it could possibly be there. "I didn't take that," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting inside her. "I have never touched anything that doesn't belong to me." "Then how do you explain this?" Victoria held up the watch, her eyes gleaming with triumph. The staff looked at Sienna with mixture of shock and judgment. The whispers grew louder. "Gold digger, thief, fraud." Sienna felt the walls closing in. Then came a sound that silenced everyone. "No!" Lily burst through the crowd, her small body hurtling toward Sienna. She wrapped her arms around Sienna's legs and held on with desperate strength. "No, don't take Sienna. She didn't do it. She's good. She's good." The words tumbled out in a rush, clear and fierce. Full sentences, complete thoughts, more words than Lily had spoken in 3 years combined. Everyone froze. Enrico stared at his daughter, his face unreadable. His eyes moved from Lily's desperate grip to Sienna's pale face, to Victoria's barely concealed frustration. The silence stretched unbearably. Sienna gently placed her hand on Lily's head, then looked directly at Enrico. She didn't plead. She didn't explain. She didn't offer excuses. "If you believe I stole from you," she said quietly, "then I will leave, right now. But I want you to look at me and tell me you believe it." Their eyes met. Sienna's gaze was clear, unwavering, the eyes of someone with nothing to hide. Enrico looked at her for a long moment. The most powerful man in Chicago, surrounded by evidence of a crime, being challenged by a housekeeper to trust his instincts over his eyes. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just stood there with a dignity that even the mafia boss had to respect. Enrico did not call the police. He dismissed the staff with a wave of his hand, ordered Sienna to return to her duties, and retreated to his study without another word. Victoria tried to follow, but he shut the door in her face. Something wasn't right. He had seen the evidence. He had seen the watch in Sienna's bag. By every logical measure, she was guilty. But Lily's reaction haunted him. His daughter, who had spent 3 years trapped in silence, had found her voice to defend Sienna. Not just a word or two. Complete sentences. Fierce, desperate, certain. Children didn't lie like that. Children didn't fight like that for someone who had betrayed them. That night, after the house fell silent, Enrico made his way to the security room. The mansion was equipped with cameras in every hallway, a necessity in his line of work. He had never thought he would use them to investigate someone in his own household. He rewound the footage to that morning, fast-forwarded through hours of empty corridors. Then he saw it, Victoria, glancing over her shoulder, slipping into his bedroom. Emerging minutes later, with something small clutched in her hand, he continued watching. Victoria again, this time entering the servants' quarters, into Sienna's room, out again, empty-handed. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Enrico's blood ran cold. He found Marcus in the kitchen, unable to sleep as usual. The old butler looked up as Enrico entered, and something in his employer's face made him set down his tea. "You saw something today," Enrico said. It wasn't a question. Marcus hesitated only a moment. "Miss Castellano, I saw her coming from the servants' wing this morning. I thought it strange, but I didn't want to make accusations without proof." "You have proof now." "I have proof now." Marcus nodded slowly. "Miss Monroe is a good woman, sir. Whatever her circumstances, she has never been anything but honest in this house." Enrico said nothing. He simply turned and walked away. The confrontation came the next morning. Victoria was having breakfast in the sunroom when Enrico appeared in the doorway. She smiled, but the smile faded when she saw his expression. "We need to talk," he said. In the privacy of his study, Enrico played the security footage without comment. He watched Victoria's face cycle through shock, denial, and finally cold fury. "This proves nothing," she hissed. "I was simply exploring the house. You were planting evidence to frame an innocent woman." "Innocent?" Victoria laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "She's a gold digger with a mountain of debt. She came here to sink her claws into you, and you're too blind to see it. What I see is a woman who refused my money. Twice. What I see is the person who gave my daughter her voice back." Enrico's voice was quiet but deadly. "And what I see is someone who tried to destroy her out of jealousy and spite." Victoria's mask finally shattered. "She's a servant!" she screamed. "A nobody from nowhere. Are you really going to throw away our alliance for that? I'm ending our engagement because you have no heart, Victoria. Because you would destroy an innocent person to protect your position. That's not the kind of woman I want near my daughter." Victoria's eyes blazed with hatred. "The Castellano family will not forgive this insult. You're making enemies you cannot afford, Enrico." He met her gaze without flinching. "They can try." Victoria gathered her things with trembling hands. At the door, she turned back one last time. "You'll regret this. Both of you will regret this." Then she was gone. Enrico stood alone in his study, staring at the door she had slammed behind her. He had just broken an alliance that had taken years to build. He had just made enemies of one of the most powerful families in the underworld. He had just declared war on one of the most powerful mafia families, for a housekeeper. And he didn't regret it for a second. The news spread through the mansion like wildfire. Victoria was gone. The engagement was broken. Enrico Valenti had chosen to believe the housekeeper over his own fiancé. Sienna heard the whispers from the other staff. She heard about the security footage, about the confrontation, about Victoria's threats as she stormed out the door, and with every word, the weight on her chest grew heavier. She found Marcus in the kitchen that evening and asked him to tell her everything. The old butler hesitated, but something in her eyes made him speak. He told her about the Castellano family, about their reach, their power, their reputation for vengeance. He told her that breaking the engagement wasn't just a personal insult. It was a declaration of war between two criminal empires. "Mr. Valenti knows the risks," Marcus said quietly. "He made his choice. Because of me," Sienna whispered. "He made enemies because of me." Marcus didn't deny it. That night, Sienna couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened since she arrived at this house. She had come here to earn money for Tommy's surgery. She had stayed because of Lily. Somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with a man she had no right to love. And now that man was going to war, because of her. She thought about Tommy, waiting for a surgery that might never come. About her mother, trapped in a broken body. About Lily, who had finally found her voice and would lose it again if violence came to this house. The decision formed slowly, painfully, like a wound being stitched without anesthesia. She couldn't stay. Not if staying meant putting everyone she loved in danger. At 3 a.m, Sienna sat down at the small desk in her room and began to write. The words came slowly, each one costing her a piece of her heart. When the letter was finished, she folded it carefully and placed it on her pillow. Then she walked to Lily's room. The little girl was sleeping peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver patterns across her face. Sienna knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. She brushed a curl from Lily's forehead and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm sorry, sweet girl," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She wanted to stay. God, she wanted to stay. But love meant sacrifice, and sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away. Sienna picked up her small suitcase and her mother's guitar. She took one last look at the sleeping child, then turned and left without making a sound. The morning sun found Enrico in the hallway outside Sienna's room. He had come to talk to her, to tell her that Victoria was gone, to tell her things he hadn't yet put into words. But the room was empty. The letter sat on the pillow like an accusation. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The words blurred before his eyes. I am not worth you losing everything. Lily needs peace, not more storms. Please don't look for me. Take care of her. She deserves a life without shadows. The paper crumpled in his fist. Papa? He turned. Lily stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Where is Sienna? I want to sing with her. Enrico couldn't answer. His throat had closed completely. Lily's face began to crumble. Papa? Where did Sienna go? Still no answer. The little girl walked to him and took his hand. Her eyes, so full of light these past weeks, were beginning to dim. Promise me, Papa. Promise you'll bring her back. Enrico looked at his daughter, at the hope fading from her face, at the silence threatening to swallow her again. She sacrificed herself to protect him, but she didn't understand that losing her was more devastating than any war. Enrico didn't wait for dawn to break completely. He drove himself, something he rarely did. The black Maserati cut through the morning fog like a blade, heading south on Interstate 90 toward Gary, Indiana. The GPS showed 45 minutes. He made it in 30. The address had been in Sienna's employee file. He had never looked at it closely before. Now, as he turned into the neighborhood, he understood why. Gary was a ghost town wearing the skeleton of a city. Abandoned factories loomed against the gray sky. Boarded-up houses lined streets that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Trash collected in corners. Stray dogs wandered through empty lots. Enrico had seen poverty before. He had grown up adjacent to it, insulated by his family's wealth but aware of its existence. This was different. This was poverty that had given up hope. The apartment building was worse than he imagined. Crumbling brick, broken windows patched with cardboard, a front door that hung crooked on its hinges. He climbed 3 flights of stairs that groaned under his weight and knocked on apartment 3B. A boy answered, 12 years old, thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He coughed twice before speaking. Who are you? I'm looking for Sienna. The boy studied him with surprising shrewdness. She's working. Won't be back until morning. From inside the apartment came a weak voice. Tommy? Who's there? Enrico looked past the boy and felt his heart crack. A woman lay on a narrow bed, covered with a thin blanket. Her face was gaunt, her body motionless from the waist down, but her eyes, when they met his, held the same quiet strength he had seen in Sienna. Grace Monroe, the mother who had been beaten into paralysis. The woman Sienna had sacrificed everything to protect. I'm a friend of your daughter's, Enrico said softly. I need to find her. Grace studied him for a long moment. Then she gave him the name of a diner 3 blocks away. Enrico arrived to find the place nearly empty. A waitress told him Sienna's shift ended at 6 a.m. He looked at his watch. It was barely midnight. He waited, 6 hours in a cracked vinyl booth, drinking bitter coffee and watching the door. The other customers came and went. The waitress refilled his cup without being asked. Outside, the night grew darker, then slowly began to lighten again. At 6:15, Sienna walked out the back door. She looked exhausted. Her uniform was stained. Her hair was falling out of its ponytail. But when she rounded the corner and saw the Maserati parked in the alley, she stopped dead. Enrico stepped out of the car. You shouldn't be here, Sienna said, her voice barely a whisper. You shouldn't have left. I had no choice. Victoria's family, the danger, everything that's coming because of me. You don't get to make that decision alone. Enrico walked toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. You don't get to decide what I'm willing to risk. Sienna backed away, her hands raised. You don't belong in my world. Enrico, look around you. This is where I come from. This is what I am. Then I'll build a new world. He stopped in front of her, close enough to touch, close enough to see the tears forming in her eyes. I don't want your money, she said, her voice breaking. I'm not offering money. I'm offering everything. My life, my protection, my heart. He dropped to his knees, right there in the filthy alley, surrounded by garbage and broken glass, with neighbors peering from windows and the morning light cutting through the shadows. Enrico Valenti knelt before a woman in a stained waitress uniform. Come back with me, he said, not as my employee, not as my daughter's caretaker, as the woman I love. Sienna stared down at him, tears streaming down her face. Please, he whispered. Lily needs you. I need you. The mafia boss was kneeling in the filthy alley of a slum, and he would kneel for the rest of his life if she would just say yes. Sienna said yes. She said yes with tears streaming down her face. kneeling in the dirty alley to meet Enrico at his level. She said yes, with her hands cupping his face, her forehead pressed against his, her voice breaking on a single word that changed everything. Yes. But Victoria Castellano was not finished. 3 days after Sienna returned to the mansion, 2 men appeared at the apartment in Gary. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. The message they delivered was clear enough. Tell your sister to disappear, or the cripple and the sick kid disappear instead. Tommy called Sienna that night, his voice shaking with fear. Grace had heard everything. She was trying to be brave, but Tommy could see her hands trembling. Sienna was ready to run again, ready to sacrifice everything to keep her family safe. Enrico stopped her at the door. This ends now, he said, his voice cold as steel. No more running, no more hiding. Within hours, the apartment in Gary was surrounded by Valenti men. Grace and Tommy were escorted to Chicago under armed guard. The 2 messengers Victoria had sent were found, questioned, and dealt with in ways that Sienna chose not to ask about. Then Enrico made a phone call. The meeting took place in neutral territory, a private room in a downtown hotel owned by neither family. Don Castellano himself attended, flanked by his most trusted advisors. Enrico came alone. The old Don studied him with calculating eyes. You've insulted my family, rejected my daughter, and now you request an audience. Explain yourself. Enrico placed a folder on the table. Inside was everything. The security footage of Victoria planting the watch, recordings of her conversations with Frank Russo, documentation of the debt collector she had sent to humiliate Sienna, evidence of the threats against Sienna's family. Your daughter didn't just fail to become my wife, Enrico said calmly. She committed crimes against an innocent woman under my protection. She used your family name to terrorize a paralyzed mother and a dying child. Don Castellano's face darkened as he reviewed the evidence. The Castellano family has a reputation to protect, Enrico continued. If word spreads that your daughter orchestrated this, it won't be my reputation that suffers. Silence filled the room. The old Don closed the folder slowly. His jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with controlled fury. Victoria is no longer under the protection of this family. Whatever becomes of her is not our concern. It wasn't an apology, but it was surrender. Victoria Castellano was exiled that same week, stripped of her family name, cut off from the fortune she had coveted, sent to a distant relative in Europe with nothing but the clothes on her back. The war that never was had ended before it began. In the weeks that followed, the mansion transformed. Grace Monroe was installed in a sunny room on the first floor, with a private nurse, and every comfort Sienna had never been able to provide. She cried the first time she saw her daughter's new life, tears of joy rather than pain. Tommy's surgery was scheduled at the best cardiac center in Chicago. The operation took 8 hours. When the surgeon emerged to announce success, Sienna collapsed into Enrico's arms and sobbed. Her brother would live. Her mother was safe. The debts were paid. And through it all, Lily bloomed. She gained a grandmother who taught her old church songs. She gained an uncle who made her laugh with silly jokes. She gained a family that had been stitched together from broken pieces. It wasn't money that solved everything. It was power used for the right purpose, to protect those who deserved it. 1 year later, the garden of the Valenti mansion bloomed with white roses. The ceremony was simple. No elaborate decorations, no hundreds of guests, no display of wealth designed to impress. Just family, a few trusted friends, and the gentle breeze from Lake Michigan carrying the scent of flowers and possibility. Sienna stood at the altar in a white dress that flowed like water around her ankles. No diamonds adorned her neck. No designer labels marked the fabric. She had chosen simplicity, and she had never looked more beautiful. Enrico waited for her, his dark eyes soft in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew him before. The mafia boss who had made Chicago tremble now trembled himself. Watching the woman he loved walk toward him, beside him stood Lily, 6 years old now, clutching the old guitar that had belonged to her grandmother Grace. The instrument looked almost too big for her small hands, but she held it with fierce determination. When the officiant asked for vows, Enrico spoke first. You came into my house as a stranger, and you became my salvation. You taught me that true strength is not about power or fear. True strength is knowing how to love, how to protect, how to heal. You gave my daughter her voice. You gave me my heart back. I promised to spend every day proving I deserve you. Sienna's eyes glistened as she responded. I spent my whole life believing I wasn't worth saving, that I was meant to sacrifice and suffer and never ask for anything in return. You taught me that I deserve to be protected, that I deserve to be loved, that my voice matters too. I promised to fill our home with music and laughter for the rest of our days. When the rings were exchanged and the kiss sealed their union, Lily stepped forward. She positioned the guitar carefully, the way Sienna had taught her. Her small fingers found the strings. And then she began to sing. It was the song about the lost child finding light, the first melody Sienna had ever played in that silent mansion, the song that had cracked the ice around a little girl's frozen heart. Lily's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying across the garden to where Grace sat in her wheelchair, tears streaming down her weathered face. Beside Grace, Tommy stood healthy and whole, his surgically repaired heart beating strong. He wiped his eyes and pretended he wasn't crying. When the song ended, Enrico gathered his new family in his arms. His wife, his daughter, his mother-in-law, his brother-in-law, all the broken pieces that had somehow become whole. He looked out at the lake, at the sun setting over the water, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The mansion that had been a mausoleum was now filled with music. The empire built on blood and fear now protected those who needed it most. The man who had lost everything had found more than he ever imagined. Because wealth cannot buy peace, power cannot buy love, but the right melody at the right moment can save even the deadliest soul. If this story touched your heart, we want to hear from you. What moment moved you most? How does this story connect to your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your words mean more to us than you know. If you believe that love can conquer all barriers, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that might change your heart. Thank you for being here with us. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you find your own melody, your own light, your own love. Goodbye for now. We will see you in the next video.